Hi, I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Magnum Gold Corp. Inc., MGI on the TSX Venture Exchange. A 2015 drill program on the LH property intersected high-grade gold, including 16.9 meters of 13.58 grams and 11 meters of 20.66 grams per ton gold. A follow-up drill program is planned to further evaluate previously identified subsurface high-grade gold mineralization. Please visit our website at magnumgoldcorp.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett, publisher of the CorbettReport.com and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He's speaking to us from Japan, where he has worked and lived since 2004. Welcome back to the show, James.
Thanks for having me back on. Always a pleasure to be here.
What was the Asian reaction to Donald Trump's State of the Union address?
I'm not sure there was a coordinated Asian reaction, but I think people are, as always, merely concerned about rising American nationalism and what it means for the security relationship and situation here in Asia Pacific. And of course, all eyes are focused on the Korean Peninsula right now. So I think whatever happens or doesn't happen during the Olympics will be a pretty important portent of things to come with regards to that relationship. And I do note that the South Koreans and the U.S. have agreed to at least hold off their military exercises where they every single year threaten to or prepare for the invasion of North Korea. They've decided to hold that off till after the Olympics. So that seems like some sort of step towards some sort of denouement. Let's hope that's a portent of things to come with that relationship.
Is China doing anything specifically to counter U.S. nationalism?
I think other than asserting its own nationalism to an even more outrageous extent, I think that's really their plan at this point. And one interesting example of that I saw recently up on the diplomat.com, they were talking about Chinese state media coverage of the World Economic Forum, which of course just took place in Davos. And it's quite humorous that a lot of the Xinhua articles and other Chinese state-owned media articles concentrated on not on what was actually happening at the conference this year, but what happened last year in 2017 when President Xi Jinping addressed Davos. And all of the articles about the 2018 World Economic Forum are stressing how much that 2018 conference has been shaped by the echoes of that historic speech given by President Xi Jinping, and how everyone is still talking about his incredible speech. So I think that's the kind of way that China is primarily attempting to confront any sign of growing American nationalism, is really just with over-the-top Chinese nationalism, and we're seeing that reflected in the state media.
Did you have any particular feelings about the State of the Union address?
I'm going to go out there and admit I didn't even watch it, so I have no opinions one way or another.
Well, I had a Strata Council general meeting to go to, so I didn't see it either. I just saw the highlights. Do you think President Trump, if he doesn't like what the U.S. Fed does, would actually end it?
I really don't think so. I think it's the type of thing he might tweet about doing, and that could generate many, many headlines, but I don't think it's something that seems likely to happen in the cards. But of course, we are facing the changeover of the guard from Janet Yellen to, I believe it's Jerome Powell, who will be sworn in on February 5th as the new Fed chief. So it will be interesting to see what that transition actually means in terms of any change in policy. But it seems like the U.S. Federal Reserve's policy is kind of baked into the cake at this point. They've got slotted in 3 interest rate hikes this year. There are some people speculating now that they may be putting a 4th into that calendar. But at any rate, it does look like they are going to be increasing interest rates and trying to take the training wheels off of the U.S. markets that have obviously needed them for the last several years since the Lehman collapse. It looks like we are experiencing genuine economic growth right now based on real economic optimism, so it'll be interesting to see if the change in U.S. federal chair person actually changes anything of significance with regards to policy.
Does that mean that China actually will achieve 6.7% growth like they say they're going to have every year?
It might actually happen this year, yes. Certainly China remains the driver of economic growth globally, and since we are experiencing this pocket of simultaneous synchronous global growth, which is not something that we are used to seeing, it's certainly possible that, well, at any rate, China will be growing this year. It's just a question of what actual percentage they reach, and I wouldn't be trusting the official state figures on that, but one can imagine it will be up there.
Asia is said to be one of the few places where there'll be some real wage growth this year. Is that because the economies are growing and their governments realize that well-paid workers are the people who could really keep that economy moving along?
Well, perhaps in the Chinese case, where wages might be more directly related to government decisions, but in Japan, at any rate, of course, that is very much up to Japan Inc. As to whether or not any of this economic good fortune translates into higher wages, and it does remain to be seen to what extent that will take place, but certainly Japan does seem to be experiencing genuine economic growth at the moment, and we've seen that reflected in stocks generally, but we did see a sell-off in the last few days of January, but apparently stocks are recovering again based on this enthusiasm for this global synchronized economic growth that's happening right now. So it does seem that there is a very good chance of wage growth in the region generally, and even in Japan, where wages have been stagnated for quite a while. So if that does translate into something for the actual workers here, I think that will be generally to the good, and probably one of those self-enforcing feedbacks that will create even more economic growth.
Is the Bank of Japan still snapping up stocks?
They are still purchasing ETFs, and they are also simultaneously still engaging in outright bond purchases. Neither of those operations are winding up, but they may be winding down. And as I covered in the Forecaster a couple of weeks ago, it was interesting when the Bank of Japan made a policy announcement earlier this year that they were going to start easing off on the gas pedal with regards to their bond purchases. It spooked investors around the world who were worried that they may be taking away the punch bowl. The last of the global market punch bowls may be being taken away. So it is interesting to see that there's still, I think, a large reliance on central bank aid, shall we say, to the economy here generally.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
I'm Greg Johnston, CEO of Carl Data Solutions, an industrial Internet of Things company that provides big data solutions for monitoring critical infrastructure. Carl Data offers machine learning and predictive analytics features through our cloud-based applications to deliver key asset-saving operational insights from massive amounts of data. Carl Data trades on the CSE, symbol CRL, and the pink symbol CDTAF. For more details on Carl Data, please visit carlsolutions.com.
I'm Bill McWilliam, president of Cascadero Copper, CCD on the TSX Venture Exchange. Cesium is one of the world's rarest metals with a growing industrial demand. Drilling is underway on our Tehran property in Argentina to prove up a cesium resource. Cascadero's patent-pending leach process has the potential to make Cascadero the lowest cost supplier of cesium in the world. Visit our website, cascadero.com, or phone us at 604-924-5504.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, how are the Asian stock markets doing right now?
Well, as I say, there was a bit of a sell-off at the end of January, a few days with some sharp clawbacks, but we have seen some modest gains, at least so far on Thursday. So we are starting to see a little bit of rebound, and it seems that Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan are rising up to about 0.1% in early trading, so nothing too significant. But after a 1.4% fall on Tuesday, it's welcome, I'm sure. And again, this seems to be related to general economic optimism and the fact that the Fed refrained from raising interest rates at its latest meeting, so a little bit of a reprieve before the inevitable hikes start to set in. So it'll be interesting to see once the Fed does start hiking rates, likely at its next meeting in March, how the markets will react at that time. But at least at this current rate, the current stage, it seems that optimism seems to be the order of the day.
Would Japan up rates? I mean, they dipped into negative territory. Would they start going to the positive side again?
It's certainly possible, and I think It very much remains to be seen whether or not the current optimism and growth is going to have any actual effect on inflation, because of course that has been the target all along for the Bank of Japan and seems like a pipe dream. But if they are able to achieve some positive inflation, it is certainly possible that they'll start hiking rates. I'm not expecting that anytime in the near future, but perhaps looking outwards towards the end of the year.
Is Japan still high on cash and not so keen to use their telephones to pay for things like they like to do in China now?
I would say for the most part, yes, but we are seeing inroads made by electronic payment systems of various sorts, and Apple Pay and others are now starting to eke into the markets. So I would imagine it's probably more obvious in the major urban markets in Tokyo and Yokohama and Osaka. But it's certainly starting to eke into people's lives. But it's still very much a cash-centered economy, and it's not at all unusual to see people paying for purchases in cash, even to the extent of buying a stick of gum at the convenience store with the equivalent of a $100 bill is still something that wouldn't even cause someone to bat an eyelid here. And
stores don't mind carrying a lot of cash to make change?
Not at all. I've never encountered a situation where I was ever refused to paying for something in cash because there was no change for it.
Of course, you're right. $50 bills are turned down, and they don't have enough change anyway because they want to prevent robberies. Convenience store robberies not a thing in Japan?
Certainly not to the extent I would imagine, almost anywhere else on the planet. It's a very safe society from that perspective. The Japanese mentality is if you have to have crime, it might as well be organized crime. So it's mostly mafia-run criminal activity, and that generally mostly means that they do keep it off of the streets and out of people's faces. So it's actually a very safe society in those regards, and most people don't think twice about carrying around hundreds of dollars or even thousands of dollars in their wallet.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after this.
Cypress Development Corp's flagship lithium project is located just east of Albemarle's Silver Peak mine in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. A 12-hole exploration drill program for lithium-enriched claystone on Cypress's 100% controlled properties is now underway. Cypress Development Corp trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the Pink's CYDVF, and on Frankfurt's C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Keep informed. Receive our weekly recap of thought-provoking articles, podcasts, and radio delivered to your inbox for free. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage, HowStreet.com. Welcome back. We're chatting with James Corbett. James, in a move that probably will never be duplicated again, Fujifilm is taking over Xerox.
I hadn't even heard that news, but that is an interesting maneuver, isn't it?
$6.1 billion being exchanged here. I don't even know that Fujifilm was still around, but obviously they are, and they plan to, I guess, diversify and start duplicating instead of just filming.
Well, that certainly does make sense, because as you say, I think most people would be surprised to see that Fujifilm still even exists, and what its role would be in the modern market if it were not expanding into other fields. So it certainly does make sense from a business decision, I'm sure, from a business perspective. The only question being the valuation and whether it will be worth that in the end. But I think the idea of Fujifilm and other similar competitors diversifying into other fields makes a lot of sense.
Well, for those of us who were into photography, Fujifilm was the best. It had the nicest colors. The oil spill caused by the Iranian tanker explosion and sinking, has that hit Japan?
To my knowledge, it has not. It's at any rate not making the news in Japan so much. As far as I'm aware, it was still in Chinese waters, and so it's not a huge problem for Japan at this point. Although I believe there was some concern about some contamination off the coast of Jeju Island in South Korea, so that is getting awfully close to Japan.
And it's also an area that's heavily fished, so contamination would be a big concern.
That's true, but I remember the first reports that were coming out about it were saying something to the extent that basically this area was overfished and over polluted anyway. So it was, if anything, it was really not going to have that much of an effect.
What's happening with Fukushima? We haven't heard anything lately.
I don't know what the very latest is, to be honest with you. I do know that the situation had not fundamentally changed, that obviously the reactor cores are still lying somewhere in the containment areas of the three melted down reactors, and that there is still, we're still decades away from having that fundamentally cleaned up. But as far as, I'm not sure exactly what the latest is in terms of sending robots in and whether or not they're able to survive the radiation at this point.
Bitcoin mania, is that still a thing happening, especially in South Korea?
The latest that I'd heard was that South Korea was talking more about cracking down, which was having a negative effects on the markets. So I think that some of the initial mania may have been easing off. But a story that was quite interesting from here in Japan from a few weeks ago is that apparently there is now a real estate agent in Tokyo that is selling at least one commercial office building for Bitcoin. And I can't remember the exact number, 500 and some odd Bitcoin, the equivalent of $6 million, I believe, was the price that they were asking for this particular office space. And there was, I mean, that's a very interesting move in the Japanese markets. I know that right now in the U.S. there are certain markets where they're selling in Bitcoin, but in Japan that's an important move for, I think, a lot of the investors in this area, in this part of the world, who would probably have no way to liquidate their Bitcoin to the extent of millions of dollars. It would be extremely cumbersome, but if you can purchase up some real estate with it, well, that certainly makes it more liquid. So we'll have to see if that catches on, but at any rate, it's a phenomenon that's starting to happen here.
Well, I know Richard Branson, back when Bitcoin was worth about $200, offered up a space flight, saying you could pay for the $20,000 flight in Bitcoin. If you paid in Bitcoin back then, I'm sure he's laughing about it now.
Probably so, yes. I mean, that's one of those interesting parts of a deflationary currency like that, especially one that's so volatile and moves so dramatically and parabolically. So anyone who was buying into Bitcoin at $200 is probably laughing in their sleeve at this point.
Going back to President Trump, any idea what his official policy on the value of the U.S. dollar is?
Not really, because all I know is the very contradictory statements we've seen from the campaign trail to being in office, which, surprise, surprise, yes, politicians say one thing when they're running for office and another thing when they're in office. So I'm not sure exactly what the official position is, but at any rate, it seems that the U.S. dollar is going to be strengthening in going forward from here. So we'll have to see what that means in terms of international trade and the balance of trade.
Any feeling of relief that the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, is finally going to go through, even though the U.S. isn't part of it? Is that actually a big deal with the U.S. not being in it?
Yes, it is a big deal, and I think there is I think Japan specifically was one of the key cheerleaders of the revivification or the continuation of this TPP treaty. So I think in Japan, I think they're quite, generally speaking, happy about this deal going forward. It really does remain to be seen how much teeth there is to it without the United States as one of the, obviously would have been the major partner in the deal. So we'll have to see what this actually means in terms of trade in the region. But at any rate, there is some, certainly people in various industries that are quite happy about that.
Any expression that they're kind of happy that Trump won't be part of this deal?
I haven't seen that sentiment expressed openly. I'm sure there are certain people who maybe are happy about that, but I think ultimately, more so than the president, I think the participation of U.S. business would have made this a much more important deal than it ultimately seems to end up being. So I think regardless of who the president is or what his intentions may be, I think a lot of people would have preferred to see the United States part of this.
James, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you for having me on. Always a pleasure.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of thecorbettreport.com. He was speaking to us from Japan. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at HowStreet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.